morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest.
Good morning, Slava.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Welcome back to Roshar.
Good to be here.
Find yourself in any high storms lately?
A few high storms.
Strung up, waiting to see if you survive? Oh, sorry, wrong book.
Well, strung up and survived.
Well, aren't you storm blessed?
Yes.
You wish. Don't let him think otherwise, audience. Put him back in his place.
Well, today, good people, we are going to continue our deep dive into Words of Radiance, the second and epic installment in the Brandon Sanderson Stormlight Archive, and we're looking at chapters 22 through 34.
That's right. We enjoyed the first two episodes, and if you guys have any feedback on those, on things you'd like to see differently, we'll tap in more to talk about Shallan. Maybe you missed out on some key Kaladin points, be sure to leave those in the comments for us as we're going through book 2 here.
So a quick recap. In the prologue and the first 21 chapters, we witnessed Shallan's arrival to the Shattered Plains. She's grappling with the presumed death of Yasna and her own growing powers. We saw Kaladin struggles with newfound Windrunner abilities. His, dare I say, complex relationship with the Light Eyes, particularly Dalinar and Amaram, and others, of course. And then we observed Dalinar's continued efforts to unite the High Princes and understand more and more of his cryptic visions. As we approach chapters 22-34, we see this section is pivotal as the narrative threads begin to weave together. I would say in pretty fascinating ways. Kind of sets the stage for the more explosive events to come. So I guess grab your spheres, settle in, and we'll delve into some key moments that any discerning Stormlight fan or potential reader should know.
Is grab onto your spheres a euphemism?
Do you want it to be?
It didn't mean to be, it just happened to be?
It just happened to be.
Okay, all right.
The Stormfather decreed it to be a euphemism.
Yes, these words are accepted. Hold on to your spheres. Oh, man. Well, chapter 22 starts us off. We're in the throes of a 10-episode arc here discussing book 2. And so we're going to just dive right in. Chapter 22, Lights in the Storm, begins with an epigraph that goes as follows. Stormform is said to cause a tempest of winds and showers. Beware its power, beware its power. Though its coming brings the gods their night, it obliges a blood-red spren. Beware its end, beware its end. In this chapter, as all good chapters that start with an epigraph that seems separate from the workings of the chapter, Kaladin is in the middle of a high storm trying to keep his crew trained up and make sure that they... Right? Is that... Nah, I'm thinking of a different chapter. Yeah, because he does the training later. This is where he's reddish glow, shudders.
Yeah, in 22, we see the immediate aftermath of a close call for King Elkar, who nearly fell to his death due to a sabotaged balcony railing.
Right.
Kaladin's keen eye identifies the cut was made by a shard blade. Kind of narrows down the suspect list.
It does. It does.
I think this underscores the persistent danger surrounding the Alethi leadership. Because ever since the original king, whose name I always forget, started this peace pact, Gavilar, with the Preshendi, the Alethi stronghold on the world becomes a little weaker. Because then the High Princes are infighting. They're not sure what Gavilar is doing. The Preshendi then kill Gavilar. That starts the war. The war fractures everybody further. Now we think, possibly, or at least Kaladin thinks, this might be an inside job. Even Dalinar sort of agrees. Then it leads to a bunch of things happening, and maybe you can expound on those things. It leads to a bunch of events occurring that puts Kaladin in a very precocious place because there is an outside job brewing against Dalinar. Not only Szeth San Volano, but the Nightbloods have something to do with it, and Moash, who happens to be a piece of shit, I guess.
Yeah. You never commented on that to me when you were reading it. And Ghost Bloods, not Nightblood. Close second, though.
Right. No, the Ghost Bloods. Thank you.
Here's, I don't normally correct you, but in this instance, like the Ghost Bloods, Anyway, different characters, different entities. But backing up a minute with this specific chapter, because you covered what's kind of going on from a high view pretty well. This chapter is focused on, just like you said, coming off of the assassination attempt of the king. The king is highly neurotic, thinks that the assassin's trying to kill him. When I was reading this for the first time, I was looking at Elhokar and I was like, yeah, you hold the seat, but you don't hold the authority that Gavilar held. And the thing is, we don't even get a ton of time with Gavilar, but Gavilar being Dalinar's brother, and Dalinar, Gavilar, and Sadeas, conquering the countryside. Sorry, Elhokar, but you don't really have anything to offer. You're not doing anything. You're a dweeb.
He is a dweeb, and a major one. And at the end of this book, jumping ahead just for a second, at the end of this book, he kind of admits that he's a dweeb in a week, and he wishes he was more like Kaladin, which throws Kaladin for a mental loop.
Yeah.
And he decides, oh, okay, I guess I have to protect the dweeb because he's doesn't know any better. He's just a weakling.
Yeah. A weird place to be when you don't have the authority, but the person with the authority is looking up to you. It's a weird tension. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll get to that when we get to that. But third time's a charm. This chapter focuses on Adolin and Kaladin fighting back and forth, and Adolin's still not really trusting of Kaladin.
Mm-hmm.
He's not sure if Kaladin should be trusted to watch the king because he doesn't know him, which honestly, to Adolin's, defense, that's a fair point. You don't know this person. However, let's rewind a second and Kaladin risked his life to save Dalinar and Adolin on the plains when they ran back. Let's rewind. It's probably a month ago, timeline wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Sadeas killed all their men, almost, and Kaladin and his group had the chance to escape, and they said, we have to do the honorable thing and go back. Even if we die, we have to do the honorable thing. And they made a way for Dalinar and Adolin to get out, which they did. And so, even though I understand Adolin, I don't know if we can trust this guy, bro, he saved your life. So...
And your dad's life. He saved
and your dad's life. Right, yeah. Right. So it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. It's like one of those irrational moments as a human, right? Where you're like, I know that I have enough evidence to feel differently about this, but I don't.
Right.
And
it gives, absolutely. And it gives both characters an opportunity to view each other and kind of have a growth arc. Because Kaladin needs to understand, it's probably going to take him more than this book, to realize that, not all light eyes are bad. Because he has this childish view, I can't take a sharp blade because a sharp blade killed my friends. And we talked about it in the last episode.
Right.
So I think I mentioned that I was mugged, and it happened to be a Hispanic male that mugged me and my mom when I was a kid. So now I have to hate all Hispanics? No. Oh, guns kill people, so now I have to give up my hunting rifle because guns are being used for horrible purposes. Inappropriately?
Right.
So, no, that's not how it works. But I get it. I understand what Kaladin's going through as, one who's an observer of this world. And Adolin gets to look at dark eyes in a different way, too, where, not all dark eyes are what he has perceived them to be, right? They do have honor, and they have the same characteristics as light eyes might, with those characteristics that he finds maybe elevates light eyes above the rest, they are found in Kaladin before we see that he has a chance to become Light Eyes because of the Shard Blade, right? So
Mhm.
both dudes need some, maturing.
So the only thing I'd push back on a little bit is Adolin's probably the only Light Eyes who doesn't see Dark Eyes as secondary citizens. And
Okay.
I say that because we see in book 1, The Way of Kings, where Kaladin is supposed to be delivering a message, and
Yeah.
Adolin protects the prostitute that was being bullied by Sadi Suspen, and he, gets rid of the guys and then tells Kaladin, hey, here's an emerald, like, go tell so-and-so I'm not going to the meeting, like, I'm going to take care of this woman. So,
Fair point.
and the thing is, like, Adolin is not throwing the thing at Kaladin in a disrespectful way. Kaladin just has a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder, which is like a great one-liner from this book later in the chapters that I just love. But speaking about that, Kaladin's chip on his shoulder, in this chapter he also speaks with Dalinar after the high storm is over about, well, he speaks about him in private, about Amaranth's betrayal
Mm.
and how Amaranth actually got his shard blade, which, and I don't think we covered this yet in detail, and maybe it's not the time, but like Kaladin killed Shallan's brother. He was
Yep.
the shard bearer, right? And Dalinar, being the good general that he is, even though Kaladin isn't like this bristly response, asks for proof about this serious accusation. And Kaladin's like, well, he killed everybody. And so, again, like, Dalinar owes his life to this man. And we are getting to know Dalinar still because his point of view is growing in our, like, the attention we're being given in the book, which is great. But Kaladin, chip on his shoulder, thinks that Dalinar doesn't believe him. Even though, like, when you look at it on second and third read through, you're like, Dalinar doesn't not believe you, but Dalinar knows how the Light Eyes work, and he needs proof, right? And
Yep.
so, like, Dalinar tells Kaladin, I will investigate this. Then we see, this is like another one of those fun tensions. Fun is not the right word. This is one of those relatable tensions where Kaladin is going back and forth with Syl, where he's like, you can't trust Light Eyes, and blah, 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 to your point, right? And then Syl's like, well, Dalinar has never broken his word to us, right? And he has all the evidence that this should be, he should believe something different. Again, relatable. We have histories that you just don't get to put down instantly, even though you might like to. So, really, a captivating chapter of rising tensions between multiple characters, and really love that Sanderson's writing, his authorship here, has matured to a point where we can get different characters having different tensions with one another and different moments being shared from characters' past and things like that to give us this very robust and real feeling moment. And it feels like a movie. Kaladin dealing with Adolin's stuff, Kaladin dealing with Dalinar's stuff, Dalinar dealing with the fact that he's looking for more numbers on the wall to know what they mean, and his visions, King wondering if he's going to die, and each character, and I've brought this up before, we know for the most part what these characters want. Maybe not in detail, and like those things shift as well, but like we know that Elhokar wants to not die. He wants his not grandfather. He wants his uncle to believe him that he's trying to be assassinated. He wants to survive and to theoretically he wants to be a good king. Dalinar wants to know what these visions mean. Like we know what these characters want. That's a really important and distinct thing that good storytelling like shares with us, even if it's a red herring at some point in some books. And I feel like King does this a little bit in some of the stuff we've read, where there's a red herring of like what we believe the character wants, and then what we find out later what the character actually wanted are not necessarily the same things. So anyway, chapter 22, a really nice, punchy, no, it's not nice, a really punchy chapter.
Is it fun? It's a fun chapter.
Shut up.
So I listened to a podcast. This is a long time ago, maybe 2 years ago, which is a long time ago in our world. And it was the actor that played Zach on Saved by the Bell, and I think one of the writers. And they did a episode by episode recap. So they would watch the episode, and then each podcast episode was discussing their experiences during that time. and what happened, some behind-the-scenes stuff. And they got so much flack because both of them kept using fun to describe, oh, that was fun. Remember when, the actor who played so-and-so did this behind the scenes and it made everybody laugh? And then the director was, crying, laughing, and, spitting water everywhere. Whatever. This is fun, and that was fun. This is fun. And then there were reviews and comments made about, guys, was everything that fun? So then they started purposefully putting in the word fun. I even, this just shows you how stupid my humor is. I went to rate the podcast, and I said, fun. This is a fun podcast.
Of course.
So you're not the only one. There's seasoned actors and writers from Hollywood who can't avoid using the word fun when describing something.
Yeah, we just, we get back into our vernacular, our language rhythms. We've talked about this a dozen times as we listen to the edits, and it's like, man, I really want to stop using this set of 4 words.
Fun,
but,
interesting.
Yeah.
No. Anyway. Well, do you love books, audience? Do you love this podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so you never miss an episode.
So chapter 23, where are we at here, Slava?
We are in the chapter named Assassin. Kaladin's still grappling with his new responsibility. He's given this chance to move up in the world, and he has an ability now. He has the chance to do what he's called to do, to help others, to protect others, to live with honor. And he does so as best he can, but internally he's still struggling. And he has this calling within himself that he self-identifies as the need to help others, the need to protect others. This is where we get more and more of his internal struggles because he's guarding a king in a war camp that's rife with political intrigue. And Kaladin's dedication to duty, even towards someone he doesn't respect, kind of gets more play. And this has been a thing throughout the story. And we see this because, as you said before we started recording, 22 kind of bleeds into 23. We have Kaladin's point of view and his little internal battle that he has.
Always fighting, even if he's not on the battlefield.
Always, yes, exactly.
Yeah, Kaladin pulls Dalinar aside, tells him about the Shardblade, like you mentioned earlier, and they speak about that it's an inside job. And then Dalinar, again, good general, says, okay, effective immediately, you're only watching Elhokar. That's it. And then, to your point, Kaladin struggles with Elhokar's lack of decorum, right? Where the king's not properly displaying composure and he's whiny. Kaladin decides, you know what, I just can't deal with the whininess. I need to just do my job. Instead of judging him, I'm just going to guard him and call it a day, which is mature for the 4 minutes that lasts.
Yeah, right.
Because Elhokar opens his flippin' mouth again. Uncle, no one's protecting me, Uncle. The assassin's going to come back and kill me. Oh.
Yeah, he's such a whiny sniveler. Oh, gosh.
Here's the thing, though. You know how much I hate whiny characters?
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate Elhokar. I get it. Like, his dad did this incredible thing as a warlord, and he has to live in that shadow, and his insecurities are the things, like, and I don't understand the difference here between, like, this type of whiny and another type of whiny, and maybe simply the difference is that the characters around him feel fuller. Like, it's possible that it's that simple.
It might be also because he's written well. So when you have a bad guy, a good guy, a sniveler, a weakling, all the things, when they are written well, and this harkens back to our conversation in Warbreaker, because the women were written so well in Warbreaker, and we went back and forth about Sanderson's ability to write women, and then you mentioned a Reddit user who happened to be a woman who said, yeah, maybe, that's fair, he does write women well, but that's because he writes people, first of all, well. He writes really good characters, well-rounded, to use your term, characters. So when you come to the king here, who's a little bit of a dweeb, Elhokar is written well. And so you can say, like, yeah, he's an annoying little dweeb, but the events are written well, and the characters and their reactions to those events are well crafted.
I would say to your point, like, their reactions, like, touching on that for a second, sitting here, you can tell that Sanderson took the time to allow his characters to have reactions to moments. Fine-tooth combed, okay, how would Kaladin respond to this? Da-da-da. Okay, how would Adolin respond to that response? And, like, really gave them the time instead of dictating and giving a prescriptive, like, this happened, then this happened. Like, every storyteller, when you first start writing, you know, and we've talked about this about our own writing, where it's like, my writing sucks because you're just reading it. You're like, boom, plot point 1, boom, plot point 2, boom, plot point 3. And then you read it and you're like, wow, actually, this is garbage. But when you find that nuance of allowing characters to respond as they would respond in a believable way, that's when good writing comes out. Even if they're a sniffler, even if they're a dweeb.
And this goes into Shallan's journey, too. And 24, 25, we see Shallan's POV. In 24, she's with Tin. Tin is manipulative, and Tin thinks that Shallan is a con artist.
Charlatan.
And as the caravan approaches the war camps, it's evident, it's hinted at, then it turns out to be true, that Shallan's journey and her objective ultimately to get to the plains and to explain to the king and Yasna's mother and Dalinar, the Voidbringers are coming. That objective is multifaceted, right? It's not just, hey, I'm going to go to the war camps, tell what Yasna told me, and then we're going to go and try to stop the Voidbringers or whatever. She is immersed with Tin, then she kills Tin, then she gets pulled in with the Ghost Bloods, then she finds Adolin more attractive than she imagined. Then she gets pushed back from Yasna's mother, or not a pushback, but like a wall. She runs into a wall with Yasna's mother because her mother is grieving Yasna. Then there's Dalinar and his objectives and his efforts to pull together the High Princes into a cohesive, unified front. So what Shallan finds herself in is a little bit messy, a lot of it messy, and her reactions, given what we learn in 25, now we delve into Shallan's internal world as she continues her journey with Tin. There's this growing sense of unease, and then, you know, we get this flicker of doubt in Shallan regarding her mission and her alliance with Tin, and she keeps going back and forth. So all those reactions, this is just me in a long-form way agreeing with what you just said. When we see Shallan interacting with these people later on, and right now we're with Tin, and she's contemplating how those interactions will be and what she will say and how it will look like, and then we get a little bit of her backstory and, you know, flashbacks. We can believe that a girl who went through the stuff that Shallan went through would have the reactions that she has. Now, maybe we can say, well, if I was Shallan, this and I would do this. Maybe. You're probably right. You know, maybe half the time you're right. You would do that because you know yourself. But Shallan is a believable character, just like Elokar and the rest of them. Their reactions to their immediate surroundings is believable, relatable in some cases.
Yeah.
Like, for me, relatable. That's why Ciri, Shallan, the two main characters in Brandon Sanderson's world that I found myself attached to throughout the story, and I could relate to them because the way these two women respond to their surroundings with humor for Ciri and Shallan's kind of resolve despite her internally maybe falling apart.
She also uses humor and quippy responses. Very sarcastic.
Very sarcastic, yeah. So, relatable, well-written characters is what makes a good story. If it makes sense for a person to do this, whether or not we agree with the response, that's why we can enjoy the character, even if he's a sniveler.
Exactly. Well, continuing down this trail, let's trot along. Chapter 25, although titled Monsters, actually might be referring to the horses that Dalinar tells Kaladin and Bridgefor to start learning how to ride.
Their complete mind-boggled response to the horses was very
It's fun.
and to read. Yes.
You know, you're joking about the word fun earlier, but like this actually was a fun chapter where we see the contrast of Light Eyes to Dark Eyes in terms of culture and familiarity with different, tools, if you will, if you can call a horse a tool. But we also have Moash coming to Kaladin and going like, you can't trust Dalinar, but like we really should learn to use these horses. I just want to stop on Moash a second, and you didn't mention anything about him throughout this journey.
I didn't, but I had thoughts about him, and I found him. Well, he was revealed to me. Let me put it this way: he was revealed to me to be a bit of a piece of crap. Now, again, his responses, him being angry, and his parents dying the way they died, all that is understandable, right?
Yeah.
But he's a bit of a slime ball. In some sense.
There's a whole subreddit called F Moash.
Okay.
You don't say that about a bit of a slime ball. You know who's a bit of a slime ball? Gaz. Gaz was a bit of a slime ball. Moash, different story.
Because his loyalty is a facade.
Mm-hmm.
What emerges is hatred and arrogance hiding under his good soldier act. I mean, this is kind of crucial to the story because it sets the stage for his subsequent actions, which are driven by a profound personal vendetta. That is it. He is set on killing the guy who he thinks is ultimately the starting point of what happens to his parents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He believes King Elhokar was responsible, or grandparents, responsible for the death of his grandparents. And this becomes the primary lens which he views the Alethi, Light Eyes. It fuels his desire for retribution. He is overtaken by it. And no amount of pleading or reason from Kaladin seems to dissuade him, as we will find out later.
Right. Yeah. Entirely justified in his own actions. And to your point, and I don't think you understand this yet, but like Moash becomes a bigger chess piece than you understand right now. And this is like the starting point of that.
Yeah, that makes sense because if I'm putting on my writer's hat or pretending to be a writer,
Mm-hmm.
Brandon Sanderson needs to set up this chess piece. What better way to set it up than this chess being part of Bridge 4, somebody that Kaladin considers a
trusted friend, right?
To be
right
the douche piece.
Which is what makes this so agitating.
Mm.
Because, well, I know you and I have stories of betrayal in our history, but guys, if you've never been betrayed by a friend, man, it is a different type of pain.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Even when Moash inquires about Amaram, and then coupled the satisfaction that he has of learning Kaladin's history,
Mm-hmm.
negative history with the man, that underscores, again, his sentiment, but also kind of the douchiness. Like, now this, he thinks, I have another notch on my side where I can use this thing that happened to Kaladin and Kaladin's maybe hatred for Amaram, and maybe hatred for the established Alethi system. Now I can get Kaladin on my side and we'll both kill the king. And I have an inside man. That just shows how conniving Moash really is.
Right. And again, we know what the character wants.
Yeah, and he admits he was the one that tampered with the king's balcony.
Well, we're not there yet, but yes. Yep.
Well, if we're talking in chunks, right?
Right now we're just learning how to ride horses, Slava.
Well, soon we're going to be cutting balcony trusses, if that's a thing.
So for some of us it is. But bringing it back real quick, and then you can bring us into chapter 26. We see some more tension between Adolin and Kaladin, where Adolin berates and cajoles Kaladin into riding the most difficult horse. Kaladin's like, I can do that, and then, straps himself to the seat with Stormlight, and the horse is trying to buck him off, and then, some other people need to step in and be like, hey, knock it off, you two. The reason they have to ride horses, which we didn't mention earlier, is Dalinar wants Kaladin and the troops to go patrol the outsides of the camps. Can't do that on foot. You're not going to get back in time. Need to always be available in case something happens, because tensions are rising, both in the Light Eyes political landscape, as well as the Parshendi and the Voidbringers, and internally. Like, there's boilings and boilings all around. Things are heating up.
Maybe that could be an interlude or a short novella. Kaladin and the horse. And it's just them having fun adventures on the outskirts of the Shattered Plains.
It'll just be one of the parables that Hoyd tells Kaladin about the horses. That's what it'll be.
Love it.
The Kaladin and his horse instead of the horse and his boy.
The horse and his Kaladin and his horse. That works.
Yeah.
That works. So we're moving into chapter 26. We have Adolin and Yakimov leading in a charge against the Parshendi. They capture a gem heart on a pyramid-shaped plateau. Yakimov mentions that Adolin isn't supposed to be there and observes that Dalinar is trying to increase cooperation between the High Princes. Yakimov's kind of a funny character because he kind of understands, maybe deep down even sides with Dalinar, but the machinations and political nature of the war camp, he's playing his hand this way.
Yeah, all the Light Eyes and High Princes want to make the best bet based on the rising tide that's all around them. However, they're all in it for themselves, just like Yakimov here. Like, you're not supposed to come out here. This is for me. And Dalinar's trying to make changes to, like, no, we need to be united, because that voice keeps coming to him going, unite them.
Yeah.
Which we don't know what that means. So.
And Adolin and Yakimov reach the Crystallis, but they're too late. Eshonai has already retrieved the gem heart and gave it to another Parshendi who escapes with it. Eshonai and Alden talk. She wants to parley, to talk with Dalinar. Adolin agrees to tell Dalinar, and Eshonai says that a messenger will be sent. So here we have a nice setup for what's going to happen in a few chapters. I find Eshonai a fairly compelling character. Something about her that stands out from the other Parshendi. And maybe this is on purpose, where we now get to look at her POV in a completely different way. Because before this, all we know about the Parshendi is the prologue to this book and what we hear about them through the eyes of the Light Eyes. No pun intended. Here we have somebody also as dedicated as the king was, as dedicated as Dalinar is. We have somebody on the other side who is dedicated to whatever it is that they think their duty is. You're being pulled along, so you have these two streams of, not thought, but you have these two stories unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
And the POVs, you get a little bit of the Parshendi POV, the Alethi POV, and here is where the Parshendi and the Alethi will talk again after, 6 years of war?
Right.
There's going to be finally a face-to-face conversation, not just fighting and killing each other. They're going to try to figure it out. Now, what that looks like will be a little bit different than what you think if you're a first-time reader is happening here, but a pretty good setup, I think.
Yeah. One thing I didn't hear you talk about is the brother-to-brother moment that Adolin and Renarin have, where, they're going out on the field and Renarin wanted to come. Adolin tries to protect him by having the guard keep watch over him and keep him in the back, and then one of the guards comes up to Adolin and is like, he had one of his episodes, sir. And then Adolin tries to kind of smooth it over and talk with his brother a bit, but Renarin's like, I didn't have an episode. I read it as frustration, honestly, a little bit. And Renarin says it was just fear. Adolin notices that Renarin's not wearing his glasses that he very normally wears. It ends, that moment is like both touching and curious, because Renarin ends his conversation kind of cryptically, where he's like, we need to be prepared for the coming storm. And it's like, well, that's a little ominous, but okay, fair enough, bro. But I really like in this book, we get to see the most brother-to-brother moments that Renarin and Adolin have for a while, because they're both characters that we haven't gotten a lot of time with yet, because this is only book 2. But these moments should be enjoyed based on things that will come. Let's say it that way.
Is one of them dying?
Based on things that will come.
One of them's dying. Great.
Based on things that will come.
Why do you have to kill Renarin? You bastard.
As a good author, you know that you wouldn't kill the one that you don't get a lot of time with. That doesn't mean anything to the audience. Anyway, next we go back to your girl, Shallan, sitting in the garden, sketching, listening to the internal storm that is happening in her house with the yelling.
Fabrications to distract. Chapter 27, Fabrications to distract. So we see Shallan. She's sitting in the gardens of her estate sketching to escape. She longs to stay out there where people do not scream at each other and where there is peace. Unfortunately, it's a fake peace. To quote Coppermind, cultivated like the garden itself. And this is something that Shallan and her brothers constantly struggle with. Like they live in a constant state of fear, just like the servants. So the servants get more beatings and more anger, thrust upon them by the father.
Yeah.
As she's sketching, she hears shouts from a nearby manor, and she immediately tenses up and ruins the sketch she's working on. At this moment, she thinks of her brother Helaron, who brings her the fine sketching paper. His returns home are unpredictable and short. No one knows where he goes, when he leaves or he comes back. And as she's staring at this piece of paper, she loses track of time. Then eventually notices that the sky has darkened. So she was in a comatose state almost. But Shallan packs up her things and heads inside. Of course, her dad is throwing his feasts, one of his feasts, and it's right around the time for tonight's feast. She turns up the stairs to get ready. There should be a new dress for her to wear, and she suspects her father does not like that she's began speaking again. And as readers, we kind of know that's probably because she knows who really killed her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Her mind goes blank again. Like she's in a state of like constant trauma during this day that we get a little glimpse of.
Understandably so.
Sure.
Sucks, but understandably so.
Yeah. We find her. Her brother, Jushu, finds her on the stairs, staring at a wall. And Jushu's jacket is undone and askew, and his cheeks are flush with wine. He has no cufflinks or belt, having gambled them away. When asked, Jushu tells Shallan that he heard the yelling. Balat, of pulling animals apart fame, has begun starting fires again, and has nearly burnt down the servants' building because Balat's Balat.
Why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? Jushu says that he is the only one left in the family with any sense, which is a funny thing to say, but okay. They pass their father's quarters. It's being tidied up with an open door, and this gives Alana a chance to see the far wall. So as she stumbles, she sees through a painting. She can see an outline of a strongbox. It's glowing. There's a blazing fire. Jushu asks her, what is she staring at? And when she tells him, he thinks that she's crazy.
So pretty
a very non-dysfunctional
standard.
family. Yeah, pretty standard.
Right. Standard.
Yeah. Shallan continues to stare at the light, thinking a monster hides there. And here's an interesting thing. Thinking that her mother's soul hides there.
Yeah, this is something I wanted to ask you about. Like, what do you think this moment is about with Shallan? I mean, it's wrapped in the package of like living out her childhood trauma, play by play, right?
Yeah.
But is it just her trauma that she's like seeing things and she's blanking out? Is she seeing something that's really there and her brother can't? Is she just like making stuff up?
I don't think she's making stuff up. When I first read this,
Liar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Anyway,
the first time I read this, I thought of what happened to Yasna in the prologue where she was pulled into Shadesmar. So I was thinking this has to be her perceiving something outside the immediate realm. I didn't give it more thought than that. I just thought it was, that's interesting, and move right on to chapter 28. That's how I remember it. But if you have something for me in the audience that'll help us understand Shallan's vision here, lay it on us.
I'll tell you a couple things. There's always another secret, and this book, there was actually, what is it called? Community consensus using the clues that are spelled out in this book and the next book about some of Shallan's past, and that is these fugue states and like gaps that end up being proven in book 5. So we have, I'm calling it enough facts to make conclusions is not the right phrase. We have enough facts to make conjectures, and some of those conjectures end up being true. Not in the fact that we're in book, 2, chapter 20, whatever, 27, something. We don't have enough facts right now, but pay attention to Shallan's story and you will be able to potentially make out what is coming. I'll tell you that much.
That is as clear as Chell dung, but thank you.
Yep.
And speaking of Chells,
I was gonna say we stay on Shallan. It's a good segue. Keep going there.
Yeah, and speaking of Chells, Shallan and Tin are on a Chell wagon, and Tin
Chell wagon. That should be an insult.
Tin guides the Chell wagon. She's driving it and is giving friendly advice to Shallan on being a con artist. Tin explains how carefree she is and how fleeting personal belongings and missions are to her, and that most of her missions ended without a positive resolution. But Shallan senses that there's more tension, more to what Tin is saying to her. And the caravan encounters 4 uniformed horse riders. One of them is Kaladin, doing a patrol. He's learned how to not get bucked by a horse, I guess. Tin speaks with the riders and proclaims Shallan to be a horn-eater princess. And Shallan sort of attempts to play the role.
Yes. Attempts is a fine way to say it.
Kaladin asks if they've seen any bandits, and Tin replies that they had, and asks why he cares. Kaladin tells her they represent the Lethe King and need to patrol the area to clear it of bandits, and keeps pressing them for more details on the attack. Then Cal comments, is funny, on Shallan looks too thin to be a horn eater, and she acts offended and demands Cal's boots and compensation, which comes back up later, and both events made me chuckle because they are, as you call it, fun. He gives them up reluctantly because he's Cal.
Well, and he's a soldier, and he literally needs them to fight the battles that are coming.
Whatever.
But he also doesn't want to offend a horn-eater princess if she's a horn-eater princess and he represents the king.
I would have kept my boots, but whatever. But after this encounter, we have Tin complimenting Shallan on her impressions and then criticizing her for being overly empathetic, as that is not a good quality for a con artist.
Right.
You shouldn't be empathetic.
But this is a real moment of hope for Shallan because she's finally at the Shattered Plains.
Mm-hmm.
She's close enough to be reaching the patrols that Cal is on, and so our stories are intersecting. Shallan's been on this long journey from the beginning of the book of trying to get to the Shattered Plains. Yasna dies, and let me remind you, Slava, Yasna's dead.
No, she's not.
She got through the Frostlands, survived some bandits, and is trying to learn her powers. Can't tell anyone about her powers. Very big struggles for Shallan. But now we've consolidated the character arcs to be in the same geographic location. We'll still get very separate stories, but at least we know kind of what's going on, and our attention doesn't need to be split anymore. Shallan gets to finally meet her betrothed.
That she does. And I think the interaction, I'm going to back up. I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm going to back up for 1 second. Something I wanted to mention but failed because I skimmed my notes as I was describing the plot of 28. I think everything that happens here for Shallan speaks volumes about her quick thinking and ability to adapt in situations. Another reason why I like Shallan so much. Despite her being scared and afraid and carrying all this baggage and trauma, when forced to react or forced to adapt, she does so and does so well. Mm-hmm. With Tin, with Kaladin here, with the boots, with the Ghost Bloods, with Adolin, every event that happens to her, this book shows her ability to adapt quickly to difficult, unexpected situations. And I think, and I'm right because this happens later in the book, this is a subtle hint that Brandison's puts in the book at a future connection between these characters who operate in different ways and in different spheres. She is royalty for all intents and purposes. Kaladin's still a soldier, no matter how high up the chain he's been lifted by Dalinar. Mm-hmm. So, and finally, Yasna's alive. I'm just saying.
I'm just glaring at him, audience.
Yeah, when she was killed in the beginning of the book, I had a sprint attached to me.
Yeah.
I was like, what the bloody hell just happened?
And I responded to Slava, Sanderson, being a good author, will kill characters that he's gotten to know and that he likes. which is true.
I would have been less upset if Kaladin was killed.
Well, that's rude.
I'm just telling you.
I'm going to go find a new co-host.
All right.
That's rude.
Maybe you and Matt can take over the podcast.
Maybe we can. He's got to read these books first, but maybe we can. Be sure to drop us a rating and help us spread the word if you're enjoying today's side quest.
Well,
Chapter 29.
What do we have next? We have chapter 29.
Sadeas and Amaram. And Amaram has this distorted sense of justice and honor where he's trying to get Elhokar and Sadeas to have peace with Dalinar, and Sadeas is purposefully throwing wrenches in Dalinar's plans, going out when he's not supposed to on the plateau runs to get the gem hearts. Amaram acknowledges that there's a bigger picture, but asks Sadeas if he ever worries about the costs of war. Sadeas has come back from one of these long battles, and he's kind of reveling in the thrill as well, but he's noticing that it's not as sweet as it used to be when he was younger, and there's a pointlessness to the fighting that's going on. And this is all happening kind of like at the dueling arena, and Adolin is currently in a duel with Araniv. Aaron? I don't know how to say it.
Well, what I found funny is the wrong word, but
Did you find it fun?
yes, it was fun and funny, humorous and entertaining. Anyway,
Please go on.
thank you. That Sadeas tells Amaram that a realistic viewpoint is necessary to achieve anything in life. He thinks that his view is realistic.
Well, and
It's
Balat
pragmatic.
thinks that
It's
he's
pragmatic,
the
maybe.
best, the most sane child or whatever it was, pulling small arms off creatures. Sorry, continue.
And as Sadeas sits there in the dueling arena, he contemplates that his fashionable clothes are very uncomfortable, and he wishes he could wear a simple uniform like Dalinar if that didn't send the wrong message. And this is just how manipulative and dirty Sadeas is too,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's this. I'm realistic. That's why I'm a piece of crap, and I do the things I do because I'm a realist. Where he's just a utilitarian and a pragmatist in the worst sense of those words.
Right.
But then there's this thing where he's like, he wishes he could be like Dalinar, but that'd be the wrong message.
Right.
Okay,
He-
buddy.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I don't think we get enough of the struggle, and maybe it's not a struggle. Maybe that's exactly the reason. But like, Sadeas, Dalinar, and Gavilar were all like best friends.
Mhm.
They were blood brothers, literally,
Literally.
because they slaughtered the countryside and spilt a lot of blood. We don't see Sadeas struggle with the issues that Dalinar does. We see him going like, "You have crumbled, and you're frail in your old age," and to Dalinar. He tells his wife Ile that he wants to expose Dalinar as a hypocrite, and
Rich. Very rich.
yeah,
Cover from
and-
Sadeas.
yeah, because Dalinar didn't include Sadeas in the investigation, and he should have because he's a High Prince of Information. And so he's just going to denounce the title to protest and harm Dalinar's strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And this feels relatable because sometimes people act in our lives where they do something and you're like, it really feels like you're just doing this to spite me.
Yeah. Well, Sadeas ponders the assassination on Elhokar. They debate the ramifications of it, him and his wife. And Sadeas goes, maybe Elhokar must die because he's the realist, right?
Of course, yes.
At the same time, as he's going, man, I wish I could be like Dalinar. It'll be easier. Dalinar must be dealt with so we can wipe the slate clean.
Yeah, what's that phrase? Imitation is the best form of flattery or something like that? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
it?
exactly it. Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, Sadeas wishes that he could be half the man that Dalinar is becoming. But the thing is, like, Sadeas also knew Dalinar in a very dark time in his life. You haven't really gotten into book 3 yet, so I'm going to leave it there. But, like, Dalinar's name on the battlefield is the Blackthorn, and it's not for no reason. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, well, we get a little bit of it in this book where there's a memory that we get to view, or a moment in Dalinar's early life before he meets his wife, where he's just slaughtering this town, right? This kingdom. He's just
That's
murking
child's play compared to what you find out in book 3.
people. Okay, excellent.
That's like a child playing in a sandbox.
Well, good on Dalinar.
Yeah.
Blackthorn.
Anyway, they're watching the duel happening, and the duel meaning Adolin's duel, to
Yep.
gather the High Princes by punishing them through dueling, which he was not allowed to do previously because Dalinar wouldn't let him. But Sadeas can tell. Adolin is very skilled as a duelist, and
He's toying with his opponent.
He's toying with him. So Sadeas knows that he's not going to be goaded into a duel himself.
Yeah, but being the pragmatist and planning strategist, planning genius strategist that he is, Sadeas tells his wife, we're going to stop interfering with Adolin's dueling aspirations, and we're going to take advantage of Adolin's hot-headedness.
Right. Be sure to drop us a rating and help us spread the word if you're enjoying today's side quest.
Moving into Chapter 30, Nature Blushing, we have an excited Shallan, and she's excited because she sees a small, naturally occurring ecosystem of plants, animals, that is protected by a rock overhang. And she has their caravan diverted to investigate it as a good, what would we call Shallan? She is a learner because she wants to absorb the world. She has this...
She wants to be a scholar. So
there you go. There it is.
Call her whatever you will.
An innate desire to be a scholar, probably spurred on by the still alive Yasna. Shallan settles down to draw sketches of the garden, and she's joined by your favorite character, Gaz.
My favorite character.
Who requested she
Since
draw
when?
him. I thought you'd like Gaz. You seem like a guy that'd like Gaz.
Yeah? Do you want to expand on that?
No, I'm just going to leave it hanging. But anyway, stupid jokes aside, Shallan draws a quick picture of Gaz with some slight modifications from reality to make Gaz appear a little bit more impressive than Gaz really is. Gaz kind of likes it. He's very appreciative. Vata comes up, tells Shallan they're stopping for the night, and Pattern tells her that there will be trouble. Shallan seems to agree. She continues drawing a bunch of sketches of the thicket, then draws whatever floats to her mind, including a rocky shore with some figures, which one reminds her of Yalb, and a woman taking a hammer and chisel to a statue. And Shallan is confused, does not know why she drew this last picture. Is this the same way she saw the flaming box in her dad's study?
This is different. So there's a concept in the Cosmere called fortune. This is not exactly that, but this is a good enough moment enough to mention it. It's one of those like principles of the Cosmere that we don't have strong details about, which is why I want to mention it. At some point, a character will ask Shallan in the series, have you always tapped into fortune? Or is fortune something that comes naturally to you? Because fortune is not something that is available for everyone, or that fortune is not something that everyone can tap into. We don't even know why, the reasons. Fortune is a spiritual property in the Cosmere related to luck and seeing the future or versions of the future, which is why when Shallan is drawing people, it's always the best version of themselves.
So could this be some sort of subconscious prophetic ability that Shallan has?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to call it, because sometimes it's luck is not the right word, but like it's described as luck, if that makes sense, for like less Cosmere aware entities and groups.
Okay. This luck thing has anything to do with Mistborn?
Well, this is the Cosmere, so yes, there's like definitely overlaps. Gold, I think, if I remember correctly, is the closest thing to fortune in terms of Mistborn, but it's not the same thing. And I'm not trying to talk around, nonsensically. It's just we don't have all the information. Nobody really knows all the details.
Okay, another question for you then. This sketch of a woman chiseling the statue, are there any connections to Shalash, the one who's destroying images of herself?
Probably. I guess I'm going to be transparent here. Of all the storylines about the woman destroying the paintings of herself, so she's a herald, because in every book we get, viewpoints of the heralds, but hers, until like the third read through, didn't make sense to me. So I'm not, really an expert on that one. So don't understand the connection there.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, I guess what we have here is both our lack of understanding and Shallan's lack of understanding of this ability. The only thing we're left with is there's a second, third, maybe fourth, there's a dimension to her artistic intuition that we're just not privy to yet, and herself included.
Yeah, and that's part of the enjoyment of this journey before destination is going along with the characters and them having to figure it out too, and you being able to be there for like, you have a little more information than them because you get to jump point of views, but it's still limited in some senses, right? That's part of the enjoyment of reading these books, and we talked about this, I believe, last time or the time before, where it's also the third-person limited, not third-person omniscient perspective as well.
Well, we have Tin telling Shallan that her artistic talent should really focus on forgery instead of drawing because it aligns more directly with the real life of a criminal. And Tin's point of view, from her perspective, offers a practical skill that Shallan can utilize and not draw attention or get into trouble. And she acknowledges Shallan's artistic talent, but ultimately sees forgery as more applicable and safer for somebody intending to engage in what she thinks Shallan is doing, illicit activities. She also claims Shallan needs a dose of realism to be ready for this life of a criminal that she thinks Shallan really is and is practicing. Tin asks Shallan if she wants to back out of their criminal enterprise, but Shallan says she's committed and that her planned scam is to impersonate the betrothed of Adolin Kholin.
Yep.
Tin gives Shallan some advice on carrying out her love scam. And as they talk, Shallan worries about the state of the betrothal, even though it is secondary for her research. And she also contemplates on what to do with Tin when the fake scam falls through.
The scam within the scam.
The scam within the scam.
The Incepta-scam.
Deception within deception.
Yes.
But she's also excited because she's Shallan. She's funny.
True. And in this chapter, we also get... Well, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. It bleeds into the next chapter where Tin is watching Shallan practice sleight of hand stuff, continuing to inquire about her accents and her lectures and her ability to overget her prudiness because Shallan comes from a backwater town that is very prim and proper, not if you cut out all of the trauma. But in the same chapter, The Stillness Before, chapter 31, Kaladin is like quickly devouring his dinner so that he can go protect Dalinar, and Rock chases off some guy who was trying to sketch the Bridgeman. You think that's relevant for the coming tales?
I would say so. That's not thrown in there haphazardly. It's not just some guy happens to be drawing something and unrelated to everything in the story. So, yeah, that's related to something.
All right.
Do we know who he is?
Not that I remember, honestly. But another key note that happens in 31 is that Pitt, who's from Bridge 17, apologizes to Kaladin in Bridge 4 because he admits, like, hey, I was actually real happy when you guys went on hunts when we were bridgemen. And he apologizes, which is... It's kind of a nice moment. It's endearing. It's appreciative. But the thing is, like, if you were in Bridge 17, you'd also appreciate that someone else win, right? Like, all right, I'm not the guy on the dock right now having to deal with whatever. So I get it. Does it make it right? No, but I get it, you know?
Yep.
And then the final thing in this chapter is that Tin tells Shallan she's going to get more information that evening and via span read of everything that's going on because Tin shares that the Vaden King's dead, the 6 High Princes are dead, all by Szeth, son Villano, and they've reached the outside of the war camp. So they're finally, moments away from Shallan meeting her betrothed and being in the war camp and being able to report about Yasna's research and discoveries.
And this brings us to a long chapter, chapter 32, The One Who Hates. Kaladin is asleep during a high storm and dreams he is the storm and speaks to Stormfather about Syl. The Stormfather predicts that Kaladin will betray and kill Syl, and he's already beginning to do so. As they speak, a second larger storm with red lightning appears, and the Stormfather says he is sorry and tells Kaladin that he comes. Kaladin wakes up as Adolin and Renarin are discussing the upcoming meeting with the Prescendi, and Kaladin goes to a balcony to check the weather, but only sees the diminishing of the winds as the high storm passes. And we quickly get a view of Pattern, who's whimpering. Syl tells Kaladin something is wrong, and the one who hates is coming, and that something bad is going to happen.
So who do you think the one who hates is?
Oh, goodness. I know his name. It's
Well, when you were first reading it, what did you think that meant?
Well, this is the guy I was thinking about. What's the guy's name? The one who is coming. He's bringing the desolation.
Odium.
That guy. That's who I think it is.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Cool.
Kaladin explains that his instincts sense danger to Dalinar, and Dalinar agrees and tells him to trust his senses and leave the palace despite Elhokar's descent. And Elhokar is always descending at something.
Yes.
Kaladin sends Beld and Haber to scout their way and leaves Moash and Relinor to guard the rear with Mart and Eth. They have to stay with the king. As they flee to the palace, they find dark hallway where the spheres were drained and a hole cut in the palace wall, right through the rock. And our boy Szeth appears with stormlight leaking from his body.
It's just such a visceral scene. Like the hallway's dark, and then you see the shadow, the outline of a man walking down the hallway, glowing blue.
Yeah. Dalinar orders Renarin to take the king and flee. Dalinar, Adolin, and Caitlin, they stay to fight Szeth. Such a good fight scene.
It's very good.
Yeah. Dalinar and Kaladin armed with spears, and Adolin with a shard blade. The three rush Szeth, but he eludes them by using lashing. He binds Adolin to the ceiling, and Kaladin and Dalinar both stab Szeth with their spears, but he chops their weapons in half with his blade and smacks down Dalinar as he heals using Stormlight. Adolin falls to the ground, and the lashing runs out, and he stays down. Kaladin uses his spear like a quarterstaff, and with Syl flying around him, attacks Szeth. He hits him a few times and forces him to draw more Stormlight. Szeth, because he's a worthy assassin, is able to dodge a strike and stab Kaladin through his arm with a sharp blade, causing it to go numb and lifeless. This was a very intense.
This was a big scene, yeah.
It was intense. Kaladin is kicked into a wall and slumps in frustration as Szeth goes down to chase his prey. Syl tells Kaladin and Szeth is not a Radiant, but something worse, and pleads for Kaladin to get up. Dalinar confronts Szeth and says he won't let the king die, but Szeth says he's here to kill Dalinar instead. Dun, dun,
this
dun.
is an eye-opener for us, because we are in the same belief system as the king, that Szeth wants to kill the king. But Szeth is here to kill Dalinar, which is like, whoa, okay, that's not good.
Yeah, but I think we know. Somewhere I picked up that Szeth is there to kill Dalinar. This wasn't a surprise to me. There's a conversation somewhere.
Yeah, Szeth is given orders to kill Dalinar earlier. Yeah. But it's still shocking to see it happen.
And then we see Szeth swing from above his head for a killing blow. But Dalinar catches the sharp blade between his palms, and Kaladin arrives and knocks both himself and Szeth through the hole into the open air. And the chapter ends
on a cliffhanger.
Yep. Thanks for stealing the joke.
Well, it's not really a cliffhanger.
A wall hanger.
Also not true. But as we're wrapping up here, we got 2 more chapters. Something we haven't done yet in this episode is any side quests. So I want to know if you're a monster, Slava. At what point does the pursuit of justice turn into a thing like hate? Kaladin's inner struggle and Szeth's moral dilemmas reflect our questions about vengeance and justice in the real world. So are you a monster? What is the line with justice and not betrayal, justice and vengeance?
That's a good question. I don't think I'm a monster, but
the people you've harmed would say otherwise. You're a villain in their story.
Well, everybody's a villain in somebody's story. We've all done things that are
I'm not
unkind to other people, whether we knew it or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just act like D-bags because we're immature, unknowing, ignorant.
Young and ignorant, yeah.
Young and ignorant, yeah. We're all a villain in somebody's story. But maybe I can answer your question with an example or a story. Like the American justice system, there are parts of it that are on their head, right? They're inverted. A murderer can get a plea deal just to expedite the process and serve, 7 years for murdering somebody, when decades ago, a guy who got caught with a few ounces of weed, depending on the state or federal statute, would make him a felon and give him 20 years, and nobody bats an eye. Not the judge, not the prosecutor. So justice has to be a warranted, measured response to the crime. if we're going to talk about criminals.
It should be. Yeah, it should be.
Yeah. So that's justice.
That's objective justice.
Right.
Justice that is blind. The Greek visual for justice is a woman holding scales in one hand and a sword in another, blindfolded, which is where the phrase justice is blind comes from, because justice doesn't care about your dilemmas. It simply measures the scales and then lets the sword descend where it does.
Or where it needs to, right?
Yep.
It's not arbitrary. That would be my answer as best as I can formulate it on the spot. So that would be my best answer. It has to be measured, and it can't be self-serving. It can't be blind, hateful retribution. It has to be a measured response.
Retribution's a good word. Retribution might come up later in this series. Yeah, I agree with you. The justice should be more objective and let the punishment fit the crime rather than some sort of light eyes level, distinction of like, well, if you've got 2 ounces of weed, you're going to prison for 20 years versus killing a man going for 7. It's like, no, that's a broken system. That's not justice. That's, classism and other things, and it needs to be rooted out from the top down. Anyway, let's get back. Let's wrap up these 2 chapters and send people back on their way so that we can revisit Roshar again next week.
Yeah. So chapter 33, Burdens. We're still with Kaladin and Szeth. They are plunging towards the ground. Szeth starts glowing more brightly, and Kaladin uses Szeth's gemstone to draw in some stormlight before he loses his grip on the assassin. Kaladin lands hard, but the stormlight quickly heals him, and though his right arm is still gray and lifeless, he has some sense of feeling in his arm, which eventually gets better. It heals. Szeth is shocked at Kaladin's survival and thinks he accidentally lashed Kaladin to slow his fall.
This is enjoyable with Szeth starting to question his own sanity.
Yeah. Very, very much so. As Szeth is confused, he pauses for a second, and Kaladin uses his stormlight to bring his right arm back to life. That's where he finally heals. And Szeth is completely shocked. He cries out in surprise. Szeth jumps back on the rock and asks what Kaladin is, and Kaladin replies he's a windrunner, the same as Szeth. But Szeth denies this, angrily shouting that he was named Truthless, and asks if the Radiance are back. Kaladin says yes. Szeth runs away, and Kaladin collapses in exhaustion.
Yeah, this is a big moment for Szeth because he has to confront that all of the killing he's done for being called truthless by the equivalent of Light Eyes in his culture means that he's killed arbitrarily, and he's shed innocent blood.
Yeah.
And he's running away from himself from that. This is a big moment for Szeth, even though we're distracted with the presence of Kaladin and bringing his Shardblade wound back to life, which then Adolin, when things come to and Kaladin wakes up and, everyone reconvenes, Adolin in the heat of battle is remembering that, Kaladin got struck in the arm. His arm should be dead because Adolin knows about Shardblade wounds because he uses one on the battlefield all the time, and this big fall that he had, and he just, chalks up, I'm being paranoid. And I think understandably so. Adolin was in the midst of battle. Adolin is the best duelist, but he is out of his element completely in terms of, now having to fight Radiance as a normal mortal. That's really hard, especially with, someone who's been well-trained. Also, having to trust Kaladin and then protect the king, but then find out that, the assassin wanted to kill his father, not the king. It's just a lot to deal with for one young man.
Absolutely. And Kaladin, Syl, Adolin, Dalinar, they're all surprised. They ponder the strangeness of Kaladin's healing ability because they all know that he was hit with a Shardblade. And all of them, to a degree, kind of dismiss their suspicion and paranoia because they're in this heat of battle. They're in this moment of extreme pressure. And so they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. But they kind of put in the back of their heads, there's something about Kaladin. After a little bit, Kaladin finds Beld's corpse and laments that he failed the bridgemen. Here we get Morosal Kaladin, which here we kind of understand.
But even in the midst of his arm healing, he's not even paying attention to his arm healing from such a big wound, he's like taken away from that. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. And Syl confronts Kaladin and comforts him in a way. Says, hey, Beld died protecting, and that was Beld's choice. Kaladin asks how skilled the assassin was, and if Kaladin has more words to speak. But Syl says that though there are more words, he's not ready to speak them. Kaladin ponders how the assassin could have found a spren to bond and yet slaughter without honor, and compares that to his killing of Preshendi. Syl tells him the two situations are totally different since Kaladin is protecting, and Szeth's Shardblade is somehow different. Dun dun dun. And that he uses the wrong amount of Stormlight. Kaladin finds another one of his men, Haber. He's still alive, with both legs disabled because he got hit with that Shardblade. And he says he will stay with Bridge 4 as a cook and brings him to get some medical attention.
Yeah, Kaladin is now having to face similar personal truths like Szeth, different but personal, of like, okay, are there more words to speak? Well, of course there's more words. But how is the comparison he made about Szeth different from his killing Parshendi? And like, this is a big moment for that because he will continue to wrestle with that moving forward.
Yeah.
A little here, a little there. But like, that's a big deal having to deal with that. So.
Yeah. All right. Last chapter of the section, 34, Blossoms and Cake. That could be a good band name for a 90s alternative rock.
I was thinking late 80s, just because of Blossom. Anyway, or were they 70s? It doesn't matter. Carry on.
Blossoms and Cake.
Blossoms and Cake. Shallan catches some information on Tin's span read about political situation in Yaakoved and dwells on the consequences of her family if there's a succession war, because she left her brothers, as a reminder to the audience, she left her brothers to try to get to Jasnah and steal her soulcaster and find a way to replace their dwindling wealth because their soulcaster is broken. But Jasnah's soulcaster was not real. So that's when we find out that Jasnah, before she died, dramatic pause, was simply doing it because she is a Radiant. So then she reads more information about Sadeas and the former leader and reward bounties and some other information. Shallan gets angry at Tin because Tin wants to turn them in and says that she promised them amnesty. And this is talking about the people helping Shallan. But Tin scoffs and says that a con artist can't afford to believe their own lies and that Shallan has no choice to get Sadeas to forgive the deserters who fled from Bridge 4 before Bridge 4 was freed, Gaz and the crew. And Shallan's upset and worries and, is letting out her own personality again instead of keeping it bottled up to continue training under Tin. She basically believes that Tin is wrong. Tin continues to read this band read and announces that there's good news, and Shallan reads the printout about Jasnah being dead, just like I said, and that the wind's pleasure being lost, everyone died.
Such a great moment. I love this moment. The span read also mentions Jasnah taking on a new ward, a girl named Shallan. Tin reacts immediately, understanding what's going on. She slams Shallan to the ground, asking if Yana somehow survived. Shallan, not knowing that Jasnah's still alive, says no.
Shallan's dead.
Pattern distracts Tin briefly, but it's not enough for Shallan to break free. Tin draws her sword, but Shallan uses Stormlight, creates an illusion, distracts Tin, and stabs Tin just as Tin deserves. Talk about justice. Just kidding. But very good scene. Shallan kills Tin. Vatha, Gaz, and the others appear in the tent saying they heard a voice telling them to help Shallan. That would be Pattern. And then heard Shallan screams and fought their way through Tin's soldiers to help Shallan. Vatha sees the Shardblade and says that Shallan could have killed the bandits all on her own. Shallan tells them the voice they heard was her spren. Tin was an assassin, and they are to search Tin's tent for any documents for Shallan to read. Shallan watches as the span read continues to write that Tin's employers, who happen to be the Ghost Bloods, want to hire her for another job and inquire if she would have a meeting arranged at the war camps. Shallan realizes that the city the Ghost Bloods are investigating is Urethru and replies yes. Deception within deception.
Mm-hmm. The Ghost Bloods are the ones who killed Jasnah because she's dead. The Ghostbloods are also the ones who gave, and I don't know if we learned this or not, so if we didn't, that's right, at me in the comments. The Ghostbloods are the ones who gave Shallan's father his soulcaster.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
No, I am right. I just don't know if it was revealed to you yet or not. I can't remember if it was in this book or not. It slips my mind. The Ghostbloods are related to Mistborn, which I've told you to read, and you've started. So, albeit you don't like the book so far.
Not particularly. Not as captivating as these books.
Fair, but the Ghostbloods are directly related to Mistborn, entirely related. So that's why it's important to know what's going on here, what's going on in Mistborn, to know what's going on here more, because some of the people from Mistborn are in Ghostbloods. Any final thoughts as we wrap this one up?
Nothing except the fact that this is such a dense book, and this section has a lot of things that set up what happens at the end of the book, and then what happens in the front end of the next book, which I've paused to read Mistborn. Just great writing. I mean, you in the audience and everybody else knows that both you and I are Sanderson fans, so we probably won't say anything, overtly negative, although I found some people who don't like this series on YouTube doing some research for this particular episode, which was whatever. It is what it is. Final thoughts are dense section, very packed in with a lot of stuff, leaves a lot of questions answered, a lot more questions that are brought up. So, good stuff.
Awesome. Share this episode with your fellow book adventurers. It helps more listeners discover SideQuest. And join us next time for more story adventures. Until then, happy questing.